The night of August 12th, 1983, Los Angeles. A crowd of 3,000 protesters gathered outside Tower Records on Sunset Boulevard, their voices rising into the warm California night. Signs waved in the air, some bearing the face of Donna Summer crossed out in red marker, others displaying messages that would have been unthinkable just 5 years earlier. And there, standing at the center of it all, was Elton John, holding a Donna Summer album in his hands. The cameras captured the moment he held it high above his head, the vinyl catching the streetlight's glow one last time before he dropped it into the metal barrel where flames were already consuming dozens of other records. The crowd roared its approval as Bad Girls melted into black smoke. But what those cameras didn't capture, what the protesters didn't know, was that 23 minutes before Elton John struck that match, his telephone had rung in his Malibu beach house, and on the other end of the line was the woman whose music he was about to burn. The conversation that followed would remain buried for 40 years, known only to two people who would carry its weight until one of them could no longer speak at all. Because what Elton said to Donna that night, and what Donna said back, would explain everything about why the Queen of Disco's relationship with the LGBTQ+ community shattered so completely that some wounds never healed, even after her death in 2012. This wasn't just about 3 words allegedly spoken at a concert, or about religious beliefs colliding with sexual identity. This was about betrayal that cut so deep it transformed love into fury, about a phone call that should have been a bridge but became a chasm, and about 2 artists who once danced together in Studio 54 now standing on opposite sides of a cultural war neither of them fully understood. But before we dive into that devastating phone call, if you're fascinated by the untold stories behind music's most iconic moments, please subscribe to this channel. We uncover the conversations, the secrets, and the moments that changed everything, often hidden for decades until now. To understand the magnitude of what was destroyed that August night, you have to go back to 1975, back to when Studio 54 was still just a fantasy in Steve Rubell's mind, and the disco revolution was just beginning to explode across America's consciousness. Donna Summer had just released Love to Love You Baby, that 17-minute odyssey of synthesized ecstasy that had radio stations banning it and nightclubs playing it on endless repeat. Elton John, already a superstar with 5 #1 albums behind him, heard it at a party in London and became instantly obsessed. Not with the scandal, not with the controversy about those 22 alleged orgasms moaned into Giorgio Moroder's studio microphone, but with the artistry of it, the way Donna's voice could transform synthetic beats into something that felt dangerously, beautifully human. They met for the first time 3 months later at the American Music Awards, backstage in a green room that smelled of cigarette smoke and expensive perfume. Elton was wearing his signature oversized glasses. Donna was wrapped in a silver gown that caught every light in the room, and they talked for 90 minutes straight about music, about production techniques, about the way Moroder was revolutionizing sound itself with those drum machines and synthesizers. Elton told her something that night that would echo years later in that phone call. "You're not just singing disco, darling. You're creating a new language." And Donna, still uncertain about her newfound fame, still wrestling with how her deeply Christian upbringing in Boston fit with her new identity as a sexual icon, looked at him and said something that would haunt their friendship. "I hope God forgives me for what I'm becoming." Elton laughed it off then. He was used to artists having complicated relationships with their personas, used to the masks that fame required everyone to wear. But he filed that comment away somewhere in his mind, that hint of internal warfare brewing inside the woman who was being crowned the queen of disco. Over the next 7 years, they would cross paths dozens of times, at award shows and charity galas, at Studio 54 where they would dance together under that famous mirrored disco ball, at private parties in Los Angeles, where the champagne flowed and the music never stopped. They weren't best friends, not in the way that required weekly phone calls or shared vacations, but they had something deeper, something that people in the music industry recognized as rare. Mutual artistic respect that transcended genre, transcended the petty jealousies that usually infected relationships between superstars. Elton would later tell friends, in the aftermath of the burning, that he had always sensed a duality in Donna Summer that troubled him. On stage, she was untouchable, a goddess of rhythm and sexuality who commanded crowds of 50,000 with a single note. Offstage, especially in private moments, she was LaDonna Gaines from Boston, the daughter of a devout mother who had raised her to believe that the body was a temple and that salvation was everything. Elton, who had his own complicated relationship with religion and sexuality, who would spend years hiding his own truth before finally coming out publicly in 1988, thought he understood that division. He thought their shared experience of living double lives created an unspoken bond. He was wrong. The collapse began not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a rumor, the kind of whispered poison that spreads through communities like wildfire through dry brush. It was late 1982, and Donna Summer was riding high on a wave of crossover success that had taken her beyond disco's boundaries into rock and pop territory. She Works Hard for the Money was climbing the charts, and she had just completed a concert tour that proved she could fill arenas even as disco itself was being declared dead by the same radio stations that had once played her songs non-stop. But in the gay clubs of San Francisco, New York, and Los Angeles, clubs that had been Donna Summer's most loyal kingdom, clubs where her music had been the soundtrack to liberation and joy, a story was circulating, growing more detailed with each telling. The story went like this. Donna Summer had been giving a concert. Some versions said it was in Atlantic City. Others claimed it was Pittsburgh or Detroit. And someone in the audience had called out to her between songs. The specifics of what was said varied, but the essence was always the same. Something about gay fans, something about AIDS, something that prompted Donna to respond from the stage. And according to this story, her response had been a statement about how AIDS was God's punishment for homosexuality, that he had created Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, and that she could no longer in good conscience accept support from the gay community when she believed their lifestyle was sinful. The problem was that no one could prove it happened. There was no video footage, no audio recording, no credible witness who could provide exact quotes or even confirm the date and location. But the rumor had specificity, that dangerous quality that makes fiction feel like fact. People swore they had heard it from someone who was there, or who knew someone who was there. Gay newspapers started printing the allegations, quoting unnamed sources, demanding that Donna Summer respond to these claims. And for weeks, she said nothing. Her publicist released bland statements about how Miss Summer loved all her fans, but there was no direct denial, no press conference where Donna looked into cameras and said, "I never said those things." That silence, that vacuum where a clear repudiation should have been, allowed the rumor to calcify into accepted truth. By the summer of 1983, the gay community's relationship with Donna Summer had transformed from celebration to fury. The same people who had made I Feel Love an anthem of liberation were now organizing boycotts of her concerts. Radio stations with LGBTQ-friendly programming were pulling her music from rotation. Activists were planning protests at her upcoming appearances, and Donna, watching her career suddenly threatened by accusations she insisted were false, became trapped in an impossible position. To her, the rumors were lies, distortions of perhaps an offhand comment about her faith taken wildly out of context, or perhaps fabrications invented entirely. But to the gay community, her refusal to issue a clear, unambiguous denial was itself an admission of guilt. Elton John watched all of this unfold from his home in England and his house in Malibu, watching the community he was part of turn on an artist he admired, watching Donna's desperate attempts to salvage her reputation through carefully worded statements that satisfied no one. He stayed out of it at first, hoping the controversy would die down, hoping someone would produce actual evidence of what was said or not said, hoping for clarity that never came. But then, in early August, activists in Los Angeles reached out to him. They were planning a major protest outside Tower Records on Sunset Boulevard, they told him. They were going to burn Donna Summer's albums, and they wanted visible support from prominent gay figures in the music industry. They wanted Elton John to be there, to light that fire, to send a message that would echo across every magazine cover and evening news broadcast in America. The protest was scheduled for 8 o'clock in the evening on August 12th. At 7:37, Elton sat in his Malibu living room, watching the Pacific Ocean turn gold and pink in the sunset, and he picked up his phone. He dialed a number he had for Donna's private line at her home in Los Angeles, a number given to him years earlier with the casual intimacy of friendship. The phone rang 4 times, and he was preparing to hang up, to let the moment pass and make his decision alone, when she answered. "Elton?" Her voice was strained, exhausted, the voice of someone who had been crying or was about to. She knew why he was calling. The protest had been all over the news for 3 days. Everyone in the music industry knew that Elton was being pressured to participate, and everyone was waiting to see what he would do. "Donna, I need you to tell me the truth," Elton said, and his voice, usually so theatrical and camp-inflected, was stripped down to something raw. "Did you say those things? About AIDS, about Adam and Steve, about God's punishment? I need to hear it from you, directly. No publicists, no carefully worded statements. Did you say those things?" There was a pause that stretched for what Elton would later describe as the longest 10 seconds of his life. In that pause, the entire future of their relationship hung suspended, waiting for words that could either save or sever it completely. And then Donna spoke. And what she said was not a simple yes or no, but something far more complicated, something that would haunt both of them for the rest of their lives. "I never said AIDS was God's punishment," Donna began, her voice shaking. "I swear to you, Elton, I never said those exact words. But I did. I was at a concert, and someone in the audience yelled something crude, and I responded. I said something about believing in the Bible, about how I was raised to believe that God created man and woman for each other. I didn't mean it as an attack. I was just trying to be honest about my faith. But the way it came out, the way it sounded..." She trailed off, and Elton could hear her crying now, soft, hiccuping sobs that made his chest tighten. "So you did say Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve," Elton said flatly. It wasn't a question. "I said something like that, yes," Donna admitted. "But not the way they're making it sound. I wasn't condemning anyone. I was trying to explain my beliefs. And then the AIDS thing got added later, I think. People assuming that if I believe homosexuality is a sin, then I must think AIDS is punishment. But I never said that, Elton. I would never say that. I've lost friends to AIDS, you know I have. I know what it's doing to people. Elton closed his eyes, feeling something break inside him. Because what Donna was saying, this attempt at nuance, this explanation that she had only been expressing her religious beliefs, this failure to understand why those beliefs were themselves a form of violence in the middle of a plague that was killing thousands. It was almost worse than if she had simply owned the hateful statement and apologized for it. She genuinely didn't seem to grasp what she had done, how words spoken from a stage by someone with her power could translate into real harm, could reinforce the exact attitudes that were allowing governments to ignore the AIDS crisis, that were allowing people to die in isolation and fear. "Donna," Elton said, and his voice was harder now, the softness gone. "Do you understand what's happening out there? People are dying. Every week I get calls about another friend gone, another brilliant artist, another beautiful soul just wiped out by this disease. And the reason it's happening, the reason no one's doing anything to stop it, is because people think we deserve it. Because people think it's God's punishment for our lifestyle. And when you get up on a stage and say that God created Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, you're feeding that. You're giving permission to every hateful person who wants to believe that we're less than human." "But I don't believe that," Donna protested, her voice rising. "I don't think you're less than human. I don't think anyone deserves to die. My faith is about love, Elton. It's about believing that God loves everyone even when we sin. I'm a sinner too. I've made mistakes. I'm not judging anyone." "But you are judging," Elton shot back. "Calling homosexuality a sin is judging. Saying that God designed us wrong is judging. And doing it from a stage while gay men and women are being beaten in the streets, while they're being denied medical care, while they're dying alone because their families won't even claim their bodies. That's not just personal faith, Donna. That's participating in our destruction." The silence that followed was different from the earlier pause. This was the silence of two people realizing that the gulf between them was too wide to cross, that their friendship, built on mutual respect and shared artistic vision, could not survive this fundamental incompatibility of worldviews. Donna broke it first, her voice small and defeated. "What do you want me to say, Elton? What words would make this right?" "I want you to understand," Elton said. "I want you to really understand what you've done. Not just apologize because it's hurting your career, but genuinely comprehend the harm. And I don't think you can. I don't think you will. Because to you, this is about faith, about being true to your beliefs. But to me, to us, it's about survival. It's about whether we're allowed to exist." "I do love you, you know," Donna said softly. "I love all my gay fans. You've supported me. You've made my career possible. I never wanted to hurt anyone." "But you did hurt us," Elton replied. "And that's what you don't seem to understand. Intent doesn't erase impact. You can love us and still participate in the system that's killing us. And that's exactly what you've done." The conversation went on for another 10 minutes, circling the same territory, each of them trying to find language that would make the other understand. But the fundamental divide was unbridgeable. Donna wanted forgiveness without having to change her beliefs. Elton wanted her to recognize that those beliefs, no matter how sincerely held, were causing real harm to real people. Neither of them could give the other what they needed. Finally, at 8 minutes before 8, Elton looked at his watch and realized that if he was going to make it to the protest, he had to leave immediately. "I have to go," he said. "Where are you going?" Donna asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "Tower Records, Sunset Boulevard." "The protest," Elton said, not bothering to soften it. "They asked me to be there, to show solidarity with the community. And after this conversation, Donna, I'm going to do it. I'm going to burn your album on camera, and I want you to understand why. Not because I hate you, not because I think you're a terrible person, but because you represent something right now that's dangerous to us. You represent the idea that people can love us and still believe we're fundamentally wrong. And that idea is killing us, Donna. That idea is the enemy." He heard her breath catch, heard what might have been a sob or might have been just a sharp inhale. "So this is how it ends," she said. "Our friendship, everything we had, just gone." "You ended it when you said those words on stage," Elton replied. "I'm just acknowledging what already happened." He hung up without saying goodbye, without leaving room for any more words that wouldn't change anything. And then he got into his car and drove to Sunset Boulevard, where 3,000 people were waiting to watch the Queen of Disco's music go up in flames. When Elton arrived at Tower Records, the crowd erupted in cheers. The protest organizers rushed to greet him, their faces flushed with the victory of having secured such a high-profile participant. Someone thrust a copy of Bad Girls into his hands, the album's cover showing Donna in a glamorous pose, her eyes looking directly at the camera with that mixture of confidence and vulnerability that had made her a star. Elton stared at that photo for a long moment, remembering the woman who had danced with him at Studio 54, who had talked about music theory with such passion, who had told him once that singing was her way of praying. And then he walked to the metal barrel where the fires were already burning, and he dropped the album in. The flames caught the vinyl quickly, melting the grooves that contained Hot Stuff and Bad Girls, turning Donna's recorded voice into black smoke that rose into the Los Angeles night. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment from every angle. The crowd chanted slogans about betrayal and justice, and Elton John stood there, watching the album burn, feeling no satisfaction, no triumph, only a profound sadness about what they had all lost, about how the AIDS crisis was destroying not just lives, but the entire cultural fabric of the community that disco had helped to create and celebrate. The next morning, the photos were everywhere. Every major newspaper ran the image of Elton John burning Donna Summer's album. Entertainment Tonight led with the story. MTV played it on repeat between videos. And in Los Angeles, in her home office decorated with gold records and Grammy Awards, Donna Summer saw those images and understood that her relationship with the gay community, the foundation of her entire career, was over. She called her publicist and dictated a statement, trying once more to clarify, to explain, to somehow thread the needle between maintaining her religious beliefs and salvaging her reputation. But the statement satisfied no one. To her Christian fans, it sounded like she was apologizing for her faith. To gay activists, it sounded like more careful, non-denial denial. She was trapped in a position where any words she said would be wrong. The boycott continued throughout 1983 and into 1984. Concert venues that had always been filled with gay fans now had empty sections. Radio stations that had built their playlists around disco refused to play her new singles. The Village People, icons of gay culture themselves, issued a statement supporting the protest. Other artists, seeing which way the wind was blowing, distanced themselves from her publicly. Donna's album sales plummeted, tour dates were canceled, and through it all, she maintained that she had been misunderstood, that she loved everyone, that her faith was about grace and not judgment. But the community she had lost didn't want nuanced explanations. They wanted her to say that being gay was not a sin, and that was the one thing her religious beliefs would not allow her to say. Elton and Donna never spoke again after that phone call. They would see each other occasionally at industry events over the years, always keeping a careful distance, acknowledging each other with polite nods that contained nothing of their former warmth. In interviews, when asked about the incident, Elton would say that he had no regrets about participating in the protest, that it had been necessary to send a message about the community's pain and anger. Donna, in her interviews, would talk about forgiveness and about how she had been a victim of rumors and misunderstanding, but she never wavered from her religious position that homosexuality was sinful behavior, even if she claimed to love the sinners themselves. For 40 years, that 23-minute phone conversation remained known only to the two people who participated in it. Elton never publicly discussed the details of what was said, beyond acknowledging that he and Donna had spoken before the protest. Donna, in her autobiography published in 2003, mentioned that she had received many painful phone calls during that period, but never specified who they were from or what was discussed. The conversation seemed destined to remain one of those lost moments of history, significant but undocumented, remembered only in the private memories of two artists who took their knowledge to the grave. But in 2019, 7 years after Donna's death from lung cancer, something unexpected happened. A music journalist named Marcus Stevens was researching a book about the AIDS crisis and its impact on the music industry, and he reached out to Elton John's longtime personal assistant, a man named David who had worked for Elton since the early 1980s. During their interview, David mentioned something that made Marcus's pulse quicken. Back in 1983, Elton's phone system at the Malibu house had an automatic recording feature, installed because Elton often got business calls at odd hours and wanted to be able to review details later. The recording system had captured everything, including personal calls, and David had kept the tapes for decades, stored in boxes in his garage, never knowing what to do with them. Marcus convinced David to let him listen to the tapes, and there it was, preserved in slightly muffled audio quality. The entire conversation between Elton John and Donna Summer on August 12, 1983, at 7:37 p.m. Pacific Time. With David's permission and Elton's reluctant approval after much convincing, Marcus transcribed the conversation for his book, published in 2020. The book, titled Love to Love You, The AIDS Crisis and the Music That Died with It, devoted an entire chapter to analyzing the phone call, arguing that it represented the moment when the disco era's promise of liberation and unity finally collapsed under the weight of religious conservatism and political indifference to the plague. Reading the transcription of that conversation, what becomes clear is how much both Elton and Donna were products of their time and circumstances, trapped in positions that left little room for the kind of bridge building that might have saved their friendship. Elton was speaking from a place of raw terror and fury, watching his community die while the world looked away, needing clear allies who would stand unambiguously with gay people against the forces trying to erase them. Donna was speaking from a place of genuine religious conviction and wounded confusion, unable to comprehend how expressing her faith could be seen as violence, unwilling to choose between her beliefs and her career. They were both right from their perspectives, and they were both asking for something the other couldn't give. The revelation of the phone call's contents, nearly 40 years after it took place, reignited debates about Donna Summer's legacy. Some argued that the recording proved she never actually claimed AIDS was divine punishment, that the rumors had been exaggerated beyond what she actually said. Others argued that the distinction didn't matter, that saying homosexuality was sinful during the AIDS crisis amounted to the same thing as celebrating the disease as punishment. Donna's daughters, defending their mother's memory, issued a statement saying that she had evolved in her views over the years, that she had privately supported AIDS charities and had gay friends she loved dearly. But they also acknowledged that she had never publicly recanted her religious beliefs about homosexuality being sinful behavior. What the burning of Donna Summer's album represented, beyond the personal tragedy of a broken friendship, was a larger fracture in American culture that was happening in real time throughout the 1980s. The disco era, for all its commercial excesses and eventual backlash, had represented a moment of genuine cultural integration, where gay clubs and straight clubs played the same music, where black artists like Donna Summer and white audiences found common ground on the dance floor, where sexuality could be celebrated rather than closeted. Studio 54, for all its elitism and celebrity worship, had been a place where Andy Warhol danced with drag queens, where famous actors mingled with anonymous party kids, where the normal rules of society were suspended under the spinning lights. But the AIDS crisis shattered that unity. As the death toll mounted and the Reagan administration refused to even say the word AIDS, as religious leaders declared the plague divine judgment and politicians ignored calls for research funding, the LGBTQ community found itself needing clear lines of demarcation between allies and enemies. There was no room anymore for nuanced positions, no space for people who wanted to love gay people while still believing their sexuality was wrong. The stakes were too high, the threat too existential. You were either with the community or against it, and anyone who couldn't clearly declare their support was classified as an enemy. Donna Summer, caught in that impossible middle ground, became a symbol of the betrayal the community felt not just from obvious enemies, but from supposed friends. She had built her career on the support of gay fans, had been embraced and celebrated by the very people now burning her albums. For her to then express beliefs that reinforced the homophobia enabling the AIDS crisis felt like the cruelest form of ingratitude and hypocrisy. The fact that she might have genuinely believed she was expressing love, that her religious framework told her condemnation and love could coexist, didn't matter. The impact was the same as if she had been deliberately hateful. Elton John's participation in the protest, burning the album of an artist he had once called a friend, represented the community's collective rage and pain finding a visible outlet. But it also represented the tragedy of that moment, how the crisis was forcing impossible choices, destroying relationships and alliances that had seemed unbreakable. Elton would go on to become one of the most significant voices in AIDS activism, founding the Elton John AIDS Foundation in 1992 and raising hundreds of millions of dollars for prevention and treatment. Donna would spend the rest of her career trying to rehabilitate her image with the gay community, attempting apologies and clarifications that never quite landed, never quite healed the wound. When Donna Summer died on May 17, 2012, from lung cancer she attributed to inhaling toxic dust after the September 11th attacks in New York, the obituaries struggled with how to address the controversy. Some papers emphasized her musical legacy and glossed over the scandal entirely. Others devoted significant space to discussing the Adam and Eve comment and its impact on her career. Gay publications were divided, some arguing that she deserved forgiveness and recognition for her contributions to LGBTQ culture, others maintaining that her refusal to fully recant her homophobic beliefs meant she should be remembered as a cautionary tale rather than an icon. Elton John issued a brief statement when he heard of her death. Donna was a remarkable talent who created music that defined an era. We had our differences, but I respected her artistry until the end. It was carefully worded, acknowledging her impact without pretending their rift had ever healed, offering respect for the artist without endorsing the person's beliefs. Some criticized him for not being more generous in death, for not letting old wounds finally close. But others understood that for Elton, the betrayal Donna represented was bound up with memories of friends lost to AIDS, with the rage he still carried about how that crisis had been handled, with scars that never fully disappeared even decades later. The phone call between Elton John and Donna Summer on August 12, 1983, lasted 23 minutes and 10 seconds according to the recording, but in many ways it never actually ended. Both of them would spend the rest of their lives replaying that conversation, wondering if different words might have led to different outcomes, if there was some magical phrase that could have bridged the unbridgeable gap between them. Donna would tell friends, years later, that she wished she had been more forceful in her denials, more clear about what she believed and didn't believe. Elton would tell interviewers that he wished he had been less angry, more willing to hear the nuance in what Donna was trying to express, even while maintaining his position that her beliefs were harmful. But the truth, the hard truth that neither of them could fully accept, was that no phone conversation could have solved what was wrong. The problem wasn't miscommunication or hurt feelings or even the specific words Donna had said on that stage. The problem was a fundamental incompatibility between religious conservatism and LGBTQ liberation, between the idea that sexuality is a moral choice subject to judgment and the reality that it's an intrinsic part of human identity deserving of celebration. That incompatibility, playing out during the AIDS crisis when the stakes literally included life and death, left no room for the kind of friendship they had once shared. The burning of Donna Summer's album was a symbolic act, but symbols matter. They shape how we understand history, how we remember the past, how we make sense of our present. For the LGBTQ community, that burning represented a refusal to accept halfway allies, a declaration that liberation required absolute commitment. For religious conservatives, it represented the intolerance they claimed to face from the gay community, proof that Christians were under attack for their beliefs. Both interpretations held elements of truth, and both missed the larger tragedy, that the AIDS crisis was destroying not just individuals, but the entire possibility of bridge building between communities. In the recordings of that phone conversation, released decades after both participants assumed it would remain private forever, you can hear the moment where everything falls apart. It comes about 18 minutes in, when Donna asks Elton what words would make things right, and Elton tells her there aren't any. You can hear the hope leave her voice, hear her realize that there's no path back to what they had, and you can hear Elton's voice harden as he accepts that he's about to lose a friend, that what he's about to do in 40 minutes will permanently sever a relationship he once valued. Neither of them wanted that outcome, but both of them felt they had no choice. Donna Summer never fully recovered her standing with the gay community before her death. She would have occasional reconciliation moments, performances at gay pride events where she was cautiously welcomed back, interviews where she expressed more progressive views on homosexuality than she had in the 1980s. Her daughters insist that she evolved, that her understanding grew more compassionate as she aged, as she witnessed the ongoing fight for LGBTQ rights, as marriage equality became reality. But she never made the full, unambiguous statement that might have brought complete forgiveness, that being gay was not a sin, that her earlier beliefs had been wrong, that she fully embraced the LGBTQ community without caveat or condition. The music endures, of course. I Feel Love is still played in clubs around the world, still recognized as one of the most important electronic music recordings ever made. Last Dance still brings people to their feet at weddings and celebrations. Hot Stuff still rocks radio stations that weren't even conceived when it was recorded. Donna Summer's voice, that incredible instrument that could be vulnerable and powerful, sexy and spiritual, remains one of the most distinctive sounds of its era. Her artistic legacy is secure, even if her personal legacy remains complicated and contested. Elton John, now in his 70s, has occasionally been asked in recent interviews about that night, about burning Donna's album, about whether he regrets participating in such a public act of condemnation. His answer has remained consistent. He regrets that it had to happen, regrets the loss of friendship and the pain it caused, but doesn't regret the act itself. The protest was necessary, he maintains, to show that the community would not accept betrayal from anyone, not even from artists they had loved and supported. The message had to be clear. In the middle of a plague, there were no neutral positions, no safe middle grounds. The story of Elton John and Donna Summer, of their friendship and its destruction, of that phone call where they both tried and failed to find language that could save what they had, is ultimately a story about the cost of conviction. Both of them held positions they believed were right. Both of them were unwilling to compromise their core principles, and the result was irreparable damage to a relationship that had once brought both of them joy. There's no clear moral to the story, no simple lesson about who was right and who was wrong. There's only the tragedy of two people who cared about each other, destroyed by forces larger than either of them, casualties of a cultural war neither of them had started, but both of them were forced to fight. The album that Elton burned that night, the vinyl copy of Bad Girls that melted into toxic smoke above Sunset Boulevard, was never replaced in his collection. Years later, when he digitized his music library and imported all his favorite disco tracks, that album's songs were conspicuously absent. Whether that absence represents continued anger, lingering hurt, or simply an acknowledgement that some things once broken can never be fully repaired, even in the digital age, only Elton knows. But the empty space where that music should be tells its own story about friendship, betrayal, and the permanent cost of the AIDS crisis on a generation that deserved so much better than what it received.